welcome my guest for this hour, criminal defense attorney Sam Bassett. Sam, thank you so much for being with me today. We had a little technical difficulty there. I want to talk about the fact that this woman made it all up. 2 people killed, waste of resources, but a little bit of an unusual case. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's very unusual. It seems like she had all kinds of theories on what happened. And wanted to convince others that she didn't bear any responsibility for the incident, and wanted them to believe that it was some man that had kidnapped her.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, I understand those technical difficulties have been resolved. Let's get back into court, and you'll stand by so we can continue to break this down. Sam Bassett's still with us. Sam, thank you for staying with us. Listen, so, you know, this fake kidnapping, the police are doing the right thing. They're responding, they're rescuing, they're doing everything based on the information they're given. At what point do you think perhaps they're thinking, this isn't adding up? She didn't answer me. Maybe this story isn't quite right.
I think law enforcement is always a little bit skeptical when a person is being questioned and the story doesn't start adding up. Most situations that law enforcement deal with when they're questioning an individual are much more certain and much less ambiguous. But this seems to be getting more blurry as the longer she talks to them and the longer she gives answers to questions. And so they have to begin thinking pretty quickly that something's amiss here.
And how do you defend this? How do you, as a criminal defense attorney, prepare to cross-examine, for instance, an officer like this who's simply reporting exactly what the officer did and what's on the body cam video?
There's not a lot you can do on cross. I mean, I think one of the things to know as a defense attorney is when not to ask too many questions. And I think this is one of those situations where there's not a lot of ambiguity in what the officer's doing, and it's captured on video and audio. You just try to hit the officer with a few questions that are consistent with your theory of the defense. This may be a sentencing case for the defense attorney rather than a guilt-innocence case. But you try to bring out those little kernels that you can use later. But an all-out attack on this kind of an officer is absolutely a bad idea.
Well, and I love that you point out cross-examination strategically isn't the time when you're supposed to ask every question under the sun, but rather use it judiciously and make the point you're trying to make. Really great advice and trial skills. Sam, you'll stand by. Before we head to a break, we have a quick update on some breaking news we've been following out of New York. Welcome back to Court TV Live. I'm Ashley Wilcott. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some breaking news. We are waiting on a press conference to begin with the New York Police Department and District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Now, this is about the shooting of healthcare CEO Brian Thompson. The shooting suspect is Luigi Mangione, and we are going to find out what they have to say. Now, there are some details that are reportable that I want to share before I bring our guest in to talk about it, and that is that he is expected, the shooter in this case, the alleged shooter in this case, to be in court on December 19th. And he will be in court for 2 hearings in Pennsylvania. The first hearing is scheduled to begin at 8:30 a.m. in Pennsylvania, where the state charges will be addressed, and that's the Pennsylvania state charges. And the second hearing, scheduled for 9 a.m. in Pennsylvania, is about the extradition, because remember, the shooting, the murder, those allegations are in the state of New York. So a great time to bring back in our guest, criminal defense attorney Sam Bassett. Sam, as we wait for the presser to begin, and apologies if I have to cut you off, but when it starts, we'll go directly into that. But let's talk about extradition first, because a lot of times, really, defendants don't fight extradition and they go to the other state. In this case, we know that he's demanding a hearing, which he has every right to do, and saying, really, I think, prove it before I have to go to New York to face those charges.
The vast majority of defendants waive extradition because the only real issue at an extradition is proving that the identity of the person in custody matches the identity of the person in the warrant, and that the warrant is a lawful warrant. It is really not that difficult to show, but everybody has a right to make them prove those elements to be extradited from state to state.
Now, is it the defendant's right, or does the attorney get to advise the defendant and insist on either having the hearing or not? And here's why I ask this question, Sam, because there is a lot of divisiveness about this particular defendant. And by that, I mean he actually has a lot of support of people agreeing with him something has to be done. And then you have the other side, which is he allegedly murdered somebody over this. That's never a good thing. That's never okay. But I think that by contesting and not waiving extradition, it certainly helps keep him in the public eye. Could that be a factor in the decision being made to fight extradition?
I guess so, but I really don't think any attorney would consider that the primary reason to have an extradition hearing. It is a right that he has to waive. I believe the defendant has to waive. So I do believe that it is the defendant's final call on whether or not to contest extradition.
And I will say that his attorney has said there's not enough evidence. Of course we're going to fight it because they have not shown me enough evidence yet to say it may be the right thing to waive extradition. So I agree with you. That's the right. Certainly you can ask for that hearing. And now let's go to the actual charges. You know, there's a lot of evidence, forensic evidence, that links Mangione to the murder of the CEO, Brian Thompson. You've got forensic evidence. You've got fingerprints on a cup from Starbucks. You've got a backpack that was located. You've got bullets with engravings on the bullets found at the crime scene. You've got video. Best evidence ever typically is video. So as we go forward and watch what unfolds, when you have this much forensic evidence, some viewers are saying, why is there even going to be a trial? But the reality is innocent, presumed innocent until proven guilty. And no defendant, even if there's great forensic evidence, no defendant has to say, well, then I'm just going to admit to it all. They can always and often do demand a trial.
Absolutely, and that is a precious right in our country, that everybody can plead not guilty and require the government to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Obviously, the media reports of the forensic evidence are important, and they do seem overwhelming at this point, but that forensic evidence can be tested independently by the defense team and should be. And a lot of these factors that are being puppeted in the media as convincing evidence of his guilt, the defensive team is required to investigate and test and challenge every piece of evidence upon a plea of not guilty.
Let me ask you this, Sam. I understand that that conference should be starting, the press conference, within about 2 to 3 minutes, but I have to ask you this. As a defense attorney, do these press conferences provide you with information that you can then potentially use to defend your client in court? Are they helpful to you? Or sometimes investigations can't tell the public a lot because it's an ongoing investigation. Or in the alternative, do you therefore find that it doesn't really offer a lot of information?
Early in a case, when there's not a lot of discovery that's been tendered to the defense, the press conferences in a high publicity case can provide us with some information and possibly some leads to follow up on. Because there's a lag between somebody being arrested and the discovery in the case being given to the defense team. And I think you've heard the defense attorney say something to that effect several times, that we don't have the evidence yet. We haven't been able to view it ourselves.
Yeah, and that is so important. Here is a live picture we are all looking at together. Again, we are expecting this to be from the New York Police Department and the district attorney, Alvin Bragg. And again, New York is where the shooting occurred. So that is where the resulting criminal charges for the alleged murder of CEO Brian Thompson will occur. What charges are there in Pennsylvania, Sam, as we continue to keep an eye on this, that he needs to worry about?
I think the charges in Pennsylvania have to do with the possession of the firearm, possession of tampered with documents, perhaps resisting arrest. I haven't looked at the specific charges in Pennsylvania, but obviously they don't have anything to do with the actual murder.
That's right. Let's see if we have audio yet. We're going to go in and see, and if necessary, we'll keep talking, but let's go in. All right, the DA being heard there, criminal defense attorney Sam Bassett still with me. Sam, tell me your reaction as you hear the charges. We know murder in the first degree, 2 counts of murder in the second degree, including terrorism, and then additional multiple counts, including multiple counts of possession of a criminal weapon?
I think every possible charge that could have been made has been made. And the indictment is an important stage because a grand jury considered at least the evidence, some of the evidence, and returned these indictments fairly quickly. So it's moving along fairly quickly. The charges are serious. Obviously, life without parole is the ultimate outcome if he's convicted of the highest murder charge.
And it is moving along fairly quickly. It leads me to this question. The extradition, you can't do that without charges in New York, right? So that may be part of the reason they've had to speed it along, or not at all?
Correct. I think the indictment actually buttresses the charge, the official charges, and the credibility of those charges in the extradition process. And the only other remaining issue is identity. And that's a given in this case.
Is this a case that is, I don't know how to ask the question correct. It's a capital case, right? We know that. But how does one determine whether or not death penalty is appropriate or not for this kind of case?
Well, I understand that New York does not have the death penalty, and the highest punishment for a criminal case in New York is life without parole. So I don't think the death penalty is on the table.
It is not. You are correct, but that leads me to my next question, because some people talk about this. A lot of states, it would be a death penalty case. Life without parole. If convicted of the highest charge, there's a good chance the sentence would be life without parole. What does that look like for a criminal defendant? Does that mean he could end his days if there's a conviction? We know he's presumed innocent. If there's a conviction and if that's the sentence, does it mean that the reality is he may be in jail for every day of the rest of his life?
I think it is, unless a governor or an executive branch grants some sort of commutation or clemency later on due to, if somebody's very elderly and in failing health, sometimes a commutation will be granted so they can die not in prison. But I think the likelihood, if he's convicted, is that he will die in prison.
And the terrorism, so the 2 counts of murder in the second degree, DA Bragg made clear one of those is based on terrorism, active terrorism. Does that surprise you at all? Given, you know, sometimes I think people think of terrorism, there's a threat against everyone. But he did say when he came into the city and started doing this, there were bystanders everywhere. Are you surprised by the terrorism count?
A little bit, but I'm not as familiar with that statute as some might be. But I think obviously the killing being part of a greater plan, sending a greater message, and obviously the fact that it's done in Midtown Manhattan is particularly dangerous. Not just obviously the person that shot Mr. Thompson, but bystanders, and the terrorism charge addresses that reality that in today's world we have people setting out to kill people sometimes for a work view of a greater cause that they're advancing.
Right. So let me ask you this. As a criminal defense attorney, he has a very reputable criminal defense attorney. How much work does it take at the front end for a case of this magnitude as an attorney representing someone accused of murder?
It is a lot of work. You're getting a lot of input from a lot of sources. You have to build a team. One lawyer can't do this case. I imagine this attorney representing him has a lot of experience, and she was a prosecutor for a long time. So the court will give her some leeway in putting her team together and putting the case together for the defense and evaluating the evidence as it comes in.
Right, yeah, it is a lot of work. And for the investigators, even if they announce the charges, that doesn't mean that they do not have a lot of work in front of them, because it's an ongoing investigation. That is in no means shored up at this point in time. Sam Bassett, thank you so much for joining me today.